Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my April, May and June wrap up. So I am filming this like a little bit before the end of the month for logistic reasons. So I don't know if I'm still gonna be reading any more books before the end of the month because I am actually kind of in a reading slump. So like normally I would because today is the 27th. So since I am like in the middle of the book, I would normally like finish that at least in these last 3 days, 4 days. But since I'm in a reading slump, I don't know if I will, but like I said, needed to film this a little earlier. But if I do finish another book, I will like film that separately and insert it in the video. But I read 12 books in April, 9 in May, and so far in June I've read 5. So like I said, I am kind of in a reading slump. Also, the World Cup is happening, so I'm spending most of my free time just like watching the games, so that it isn't helping my reading. But yeah, for now I have 26 books to tell you about, and actually the first 3 ones are all part of the same series, and so they are The Last Oracle, The Doomsday Key, and The Skeleton Key, which are books 5, 6, and 6.5 in the Sigma Force series, which is a series that is like mystery thriller, and then there are always either like sci-fi or fantasy elements, and we are following basically like the members of the Sigma Force team as they try to like save the world from various different threats. And something that I always really like in the series is that, like, yes, there are fantasy and sci-fi elements, but it's always like it always has like a base on like real life history events, and at the end usually, or always really, I think the author like tells us what like really is like part of our history and what's like he made up, and I really like that. And so The Last Oracle was book 5, and in that one, like, a man is killed right in front of one of the members of the Sigma Force team, and with that, like, he gets a coin that is like a very ancient artifact from the Greek Oracle of Delphi, and then he starts being like chased and followed because people want that coin. And at the same time, like, other people there learning about like some experiments that happened with kids to give them sort of like some supernatural powers. And then in yet another place, there is a guy that wakes up with no memory of like who he is or like where he is, how he got there, anything. And he has to try to escape with the help of some unusual children and also like some animals. And again, in these books, there are always a lot of things happening like in various different areas of the world, and there are a lot of things happening, but obviously they all come together in the end, and I really do like how they come together. And there are always some really cool action scenes and fight scenes, and yeah, I always have a lot of fun with this, and I gave this 4 stars. And then in the Doomsday Key, this one, it actually starts with 3 different people dying in 3 different continents, but like they all have a like the same mark burned on their flesh, so that they're all connected. And so like the Sigma Force team has to find like a key in an ancient codex, and they have to find the Doomsday Key. And again, there is a lot happening in many different places and a lot of people, and it all comes together, and I really like that, and a lot of action. And I also gave this one 4 stars. And then The Skeleton Key is book 6.5, and so it was a very short novella, and you're following like a character that we've known before who was like on a mission, but then they get kind of like caught up between 2 different enemies, and they have to try to like get out of that. And again, it was fun, there was some cool action, but it was very short. So like I enjoyed it, but like not as much as the other books, and I gave this 3.5 stars. And the book that I'm actually currently reading right now is the next one in the series, which is called The Devil Colony. And I am really liking it. I'm just not, really wanting to read too much. But if I do finish that, I will just like film that, me talking about it, and insert it here. Okay, so I am here to update that I did finish the book that I was reading, which was book 8, I think 8, in the Sigma Force series, and it was called The Devil Colony. And so in this one, there was like at the start of the book a discovery of like a bunch of mummified bodies, and then there was like a whole riot outside that area, and then there was like an explosion, and it turns out that someone that was like connected to that explosion was the niece of the director of the Sigma Force. And then they find like more things about like the bodies and artifacts and stuff that are found, and like the connections between those, like in that site and also like in other areas of the world. And the explosion that happened there is also probably going to happen in other areas, and like there's going to be a lot of destruction, and like the things that are happening are like connected to stuff like from the past, and the people from that past, like their families that like they still have, you know, descendants today, and those descendants are also like connected to things, and they are like trying to figure out who those people are and like what they want, what their intentions are, and like how they're sort of manipulating everything and have been manipulating everything since like the start of the colonies in like the US area, and basically try to stop whatever they're trying to do, and also try to stop the like natural disasters that are coming. And I really liked it. I was definitely very into the story. I was very invested, and I was like stressed when it seemed that like everything was going wrong and that they were like running out of time. I was definitely really interested to see how it was all gonna go, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I actually read the short story that comes after, which is pretty short. It was, I think, around like 60 pages or less, and it was called Tracker. And in that one, we're basically like introduced to a new character, so I'm assuming that's a character that is gonna appear like in future books with like the Sigma Force team, and like they're gonna all work together. But yeah, it was basically like the introduction of the character. Like it was interesting, I did enjoy it, and like that character has a dog that like works with him, so that was really fun. But it was pretty short, like there was no time for me to be too invested or too like connected to really anything, but I still had a good time, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then I read a very long book, which was Words of Radiance, and this is the second book in the Stormlight Archive series, which is fantasy, and all of these books are over 1,000 pages long. And this story is like very big, very complex, very hard for me to try to explain, but basically there is like a war, and it kind of all started with the murder of a king like some years before. And there is like very interesting magic, very cool magic, and again there are things happening in like a lot of places, and we are following some different characters. And I really like this. I really love the 2 books that I've read from the series, and I'm definitely reading the series very slowly because it is very like the books are very long, and they are like there's a lot of information, and I need to read this like kind of slowly to gather all the information. But I really love it. I love the characters, and I love the world, and I'm loving like in this book we had some very interesting revelations, and like some crazy things happened, and there's a lot of action as well. And even like in over 1,000 pages I was never bored. So yeah, I really like this. Like it didn't give me the 5-star feeling, but other than that I really loved it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read The Book That Broke the World and The Book That Held Her Heart, which were books 2 and 3 in the Library trilogy. And I think that's what it's called, the Library. I'm gonna assume so. Yeah, the Library trilogy. And these ones are also fantasy. And in this in the first book, which I do own, but I don't have it here with me right now. But in the first book, we start following Levira and Ivar. And so with Levira, she and her people live like in the desert, and they like are one day taken to like some soldiers to a city, and they are like they start being like assigned different jobs, and they talk about like some creatures that they have to like that attack them and that they have to kind of like run away from. And Levira actually ends up working in a library as an apprentice. And then with Ivar, he lives in a like very big, seemingly never-ending library, and he has been living there basically almost like his entire life. And he's there with his siblings, and they are like raised by some other beings, and they also talk about like the same creatures that we hear in Levira's POV. And I really like the first book. I really like the characters. Like I was very invested in their stories, and the way that like everything connected, everything came together. It was like mind-blowing in like the best way possible. I really loved it. I was very invested and I love like all the reveals. But in this book, we get like some new characters introduced, and I don't know, like the vibe both in this and like the other book, it was very like it felt very different, the vibe, and I didn't really care about any of the characters that were introduced either in this book or in the other one. And I also didn't really care about the plot that much anymore. And even like the main characters, the two main characters that we've been following since book two, even them, like I didn't care that much about them anymore. And I don't know if it was because I read these two books so long after reading the first one that there was like this disconnect due to the time that has passed. Like I don't know if that was a reason, but I also saw a lot of people saying that they felt not the same way I did about these two books. Other people also really love them as much as they love the first. So like I don't know what it was exactly, but it gave me a very different vibe, and I just wasn't vibing with that new vibe, I guess. I wasn't really invested about anything. I didn't really care that much about anything. There were definitely some cool like scenes with the magic and like some action scenes that were cool as well, but I don't know, like it was just okay. And even the end, I didn't feel like any particular way about it. So I gave both this one and the other 3 stars. Then I read Dig, which was a horror book, and some years before the start of like the real story, there was a boy who like one day just killed a bunch of people, and then that boy himself died as well, and he was like buried in his family's yard. And now like all these years later, his father like starts digging, and that starts like a compulsion in the entire town that everyone starts digging. And they like people get like really violent, and they're like really obsessed with digging. And there definitely seems to be like something underground, and this was very creepy. I was very like unsettled in some like parts of the book, which is exactly what I wanted from it. I really like the creepiness, like the vibe that it gave. I also really like the like what it was that was like underground, and how everything was like connected to what happened before. And I had a really good time with this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Black River Orchard, which was another horror book, and in this one there was actually like another like compulsion, like another thing that people were kind of obsessed with, but in this case was like apples, like a particular kind of apple. People, once they like ate that apple, they were obsessed with continuing to like eat those apples. And if you tried to like prevent those people from eating the apples, they got like really violent, really upset, and there was like this sort of like cult around these apples. And we were following some people who were not under this compulsion, and we were trying to stop the others from eating these apples because there was definitely something very dark about these apples and what they represented and what people were like turning into when they ate these apples. And yeah, like when these people tried to stop the cult, they definitely, like I said, got very upset, very violent. And like I definitely enjoyed the creepiness of it, and like the like action scenes and like the fights, and like how, again, how upset people got over this. It was very creepy as well, and I did really like those moments. But this was a long book, and it definitely felt like a long book at times. I was sometimes like a little bored, but overall I still had a good time, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read Yesteryear, and this one was sort of like literary, sort of thrillery, and we were following Natalie, and she lived in a farm with her husband and a bunch of kids. And she had like a big social media following, and she just pretended to have like this perfect life where she, you know, took care of the farm and took care of her kids, and they lived off of like the farm. But in real life, it was not really like that. There were a lot of people working behind the scenes to make all that work, like the farm and the kids. There were a lot of nannies, there were a lot of people just like working in the farm, and nothing was like as it seemed. And then one day she wakes up, and she seems to be in 1855, and she is again like in a farm, and she has a husband and she has a bunch of kids. But like her husband seems familiar, and her kids also do seem somewhat familiar, but they are not her husband or her kids. And she is just like in 1855, and now she actually has to take care of a farm and take care of a bunch of kids and just like live the life that she pretended to have, and she's having a terrible time of it because she also kind of hated her life before. So she's, obviously struggling that, and at the same time she's trying to figure out like where she is, when she is, how she got there, how to get out of there, like what the hell is happening. And at the same time, she sometimes finds some things that seem modern, so she's very confused as to what the hell is happening. Like, is she actually in 1855? What the hell is happening? And yeah, she has to figure all that out. And we also get like flashbacks from when she was younger and seeing how she ended up like where she was in the beginning of the book. And yeah, this one was very creepy at times. It was very unsettling, and I was having like the best time ever, like especially for like how much I dislike the main character. I like the fact that I was liking the book so much was crazy to me. And yeah, I really really liked it. The only thing that I didn't like absolutely love was the like reveal of what was happening, because there were a lot of possibilities, I guess, and the one that turned out to be what was happening, like it made sense, but it just wasn't, my favorite option, I guess. But still, I really really liked it. It was very creepy, it was very unsettling, and like I said, I really disliked the main character, but I was still loving the book. And yeah, I had a lot of fun, and I will definitely be reading more from this author in the future. And I gave it 4 stars. Then I read From Potter's Field and Cause of Death, which is books I think 6 and 7 in the Kay Scarpetta series, which is like a crime mystery series where we follow Kay Scarpetta, who is a medical examiner, and we just like follow whatever case she is working on. And so in From Potter's Field, there is a body that is found that has a very like similar, very familiar MO, a very similar MO that like Kay has encountered before. And so she knows that her like old nemesis is back in action, and she's, trying to get him, but he's also like out to get her, and he's kind of like targeting her specifically. And it definitely was fun to follow. I just like, I have very mixed feelings about this series in general, because I usually do really like the investigations, and I love like all the focus on the forensic details, but I just don't really love the characters. They don't really work for me. I like, even like Kay herself, and then another character like a detective that she works with, I don't really love them, so I have very mixed feelings about the series. And this book was no exception. I like the plots, I like the action, I like the investigation, but the characters were just for me. There are some attitudes that they have that I just don't like, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then with Cause of Death, there is an investigative reporter that is found dead like in water, a very like known investigative reporter, like very known in the medical examiner's office and very popular there. And he's like found in that body of water, and at first it seems to have been like not foul play, but then as they investigate and like more clues appear, they do seem to think that like he was actually killed, and they start investigating like what he was working on and like what he was involved with. And I was having a really good time, and in this one actually the characters, like, they didn't annoy me, so I was like, okay, this is promising, this everything's going well. But then the ending, I don't know, I didn't like the ending. It felt very rushed, it felt very anticlimactic, and so I just cannot seem to find a perfect book for me in the series. I will keep trying because there are over 20 books and I'm only on book 7. So, until I get to the end, I am assuming, or at least I'm hoping, I will find a book that I will really, really like. But yeah, this one I also gave 3.5 stars. Then I read After the Fall, which was sci-fi, and this one we're following John, who is a human, and humans, like at this time that he lives, seem to only be like pets or servants to another species of aliens, and John specifically has a bond to Martok, and Martok actually is one of the good aliens. They're called Greys. He's one of the good Greys, and he actually treats John like decently, almost as a friend, and so John really thinks that like he got lucky to be like with Martok. And Martok actually has like a business idea, and so he makes this deal and he uses his bond with John as collateral. So he really needs to make it work and John really needs to make it work if he's not gonna be like taken by these people. And they actually gather like another human for their group, a like young girl, and she really hates that John is okay with just being a pet to these Grace, and she really doesn't want to do that. And so she and John like get in some kind of trouble with some other Greys, and there are also like some, they call them like feral humans, so like humans that are not working with the Greys and they just live like out in the wilderness. And we also learn a lot about what happened like after the fall, because the Greys came like to pick up the pieces that the humans destroyed 100 years ago, and that is how the humans ended up just like being servants and pets to the Greys. And we learn about the fall, and we learn about the humans, and we learn about the Greys, and we learn about all that, and I really really liked it. And I also really really loved the to see the like relationship and friendship and the different dynamics between like John and the other human and Martok and the other humans, like the feral ones and the other Greys. I really really liked all that, and there were also some really cool action scenes, and I love to learn about like the history and what was true, what wasn't, about what they thought was the real history. And yeah, I had a really good time, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Iron Gold, which is the fourth book in the Red Rising saga, and it is actually the first one after the initial trilogy. So this is actually set 10, I think, years after the end of the first trilogy. And so in the series, this is, I don't know if I said this is sci-fi, and the society is divided into colors, and the golds are at the top and the reds are at the bottom. And at the beginning of the series, we start following Darrow, who is a red, and he's actually like saved by some rebels that want to infiltrate the golds, or specifically they want Darrow to infiltrate the golds and destroy them from the inside. And so we, follow all that in the first trilogy, all the struggles that he goes through, all the people that he meets, all the people that he has to fight with or fight against. And this one is, like I said, set 10 years after. So there are a lot of things that have changed, but there are a lot of things that also have not changed. And in the first trilogy, you actually only follow like Darrow's POV, and this one we have 4, which was definitely very different, but very interesting. I definitely like still to follow Darrow, but also like to follow these new perspectives. And like I was hooked from the first page to the last. I was very stressed. I was suffering with the characters, and yeah, I really really liked it. It was not 5 stars like the previous one had been, but I really 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 liked it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read the Divinity 3-6, which was also sci-fi, and in this one we were following Fex, who is a human, and he is like on another planet as a refugee, and he is a bartender, and he's like very content with his life until one day an alien, I think they're called the Diacy, like their species, he hears Fex sing, and so he takes him to become possibly a god, because the powers of the gods in this world are like connected to singing. And so Fex is taken to like by the Diacy, and he's taken to a place where there are a lot of possible future gods, and we see like him meeting the others and like all the training and trials that they go through. And I definitely enjoyed it. Like I liked Fex, and I liked to see like his dynamic with the others, and I like to see like their trials and how they sort of like had to work together, but sometimes they didn't really work together. And I enjoyed all that, but I wasn't like too obsessed with it, and I think like it was a little slow for me. But at the end things got a little crazier, and there was like the mystery about some other god, like what had happened to them or what's happening. At the end there was more action, and things got a little crazier. So I definitely want to continue with the series because I want to see more of that. And yeah, overall I had a good time. It just wasn't perfect in terms of pacing, I guess, but I enjoyed it, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read this massive book, Children of Strife, and this is also sci-fi, and this is the 4th book in the Children of Time series. And so in the series, like at the start of the series, we see that the Earth is like dying, and there are there are some teams that go out into, the universe to find planets to terraform for the rest of humanity to move into. And we follow like a crew since the first book, and they explore these different planets, and there are like new characters joining basically with every book. And there is always like at least 2 timelines in each book, and they happen like at the same time, kind of. We have a couple chapters from one like timeline and then a couple chapters from the other, and they were trying to always figure out like how we got from point A to point B. And I love how like when the reveal happens, I always love it. And in this book we actually had 3 timelines. So we had the first age, which is when a group of terraformers gets to like this new planet, and they have to like deal with what they encounter in the planet, like the wildlife, and they have to like they kind of decide to play God with that planet, and then they have to deal with the consequences of what they did and what they like created. And then we have the second age, which is when some of like the humans that left the dying earth get there, and they also have to deal with like what the people from the first age created. And then we have the third age, which is when the crew that we have been following since the first book also get there. And like when one of the characters like wakes up in orbit, they find that most of like their crew has disappeared when they went to the planet, and so they have to like figure out what the hell is happening and to, you know, find the members of their crew and like to save them. And at the same time they are still dealing with some things that have been like with them since the previous book as well. So there are like all of these things happening at the same time, and like I said, we have to figure out how things change from one age to the other. And I love it. I always love these books. I think they are very like fascinating, and like I said, I love when the reveal happens and everything comes together. And yeah, I had a really fun time with this. I absolutely loved it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. And I read The Cursed Among Us, which is the first book in the Newport Curse, I think, series, which is horror. And in like the beginning of the book, we see sort of a flashback of like a guy that had been convicted of killing a bunch of people, saying that like someone or something had like made him do all that. And then in the present, we have a group of 4 15-year-old boys who are like out in the woods filming a movie for like some class, and they stumble onto something and they kind of like unleash some sort of evil, and one of the boys gets like cursed by it, and like he starts all like being sort of haunted by it and like made to do things. And we then learn more about like that evil entity, and like there are a lot of people in the town that either are somewhat connected to it or like they know more about it than we initially thought. And I actually really liked it. I honestly was more connected to these boys than I expected to be, and I was actually worried about them, and I was actually pretty invested in the story, and there were definitely very creepy moments. And like it wasn't anything like crazy life-changing, very completely different from like other haunting stories that I've read before, but I guess there is a reason why these stories work for me, because this one definitely did as well, and I definitely want to like continue with the series, and I give this one 4 stars. Then I read The Cabin at the End of the World, and that was also horror. And in this one we're following Wen, who was either like 6 or 7 years old, I think, and she was like spending some time like in a vacation with her dad's in a like remote cabin. And one day there's this guy that appears there, and he like starts talking to her, and he spends some time talking to her until like some other people get there that are like with that guy, and they tell Wen that she needs to tell her dads to like let them inside because they are gonna need all of them to save the world. And Wen is like really freaked out, and like she runs inside and she tells her dads, and they're like all barricading inside the house, but the other people aren't leaving, and they basically tell them a story about like how the world is gonna end, and if they don't let them in, like it's gonna be on them because they're gonna be the ones who have to do something to save the world. And so they are like trapped in the house by these random people, and it was like very creepy, and it was very scary, especially in the beginning. And like I was very invested in the story, but we got to a point where it felt kind of like repetitive, and this was not a long book, so like to feel repetitive even though it wasn't long, you know, wasn't great. So there was like this whole middle section where I was just like not really bored, but I wasn't as interested anymore, but I was still like interested enough, like I was still invested enough to see how it was gonna end. So like I had a good time. I just thought I was gonna have like an even better time, like from how much I liked it in the beginning. You know what I mean? But it was still a good time, it was still a good book, and they gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read Daughter of Crows, which is the first book in the Academy of Kindness, I think. Yeah, the Academy of Kindness. I don't know how many books are going to be there series. And this is fantasy. And in this one, we've learned about the Academy of Kindness, which is, they say it's a place where they create agents of retribution that the gods, what did they say? The gods hesitate, against whom even the gods hesitate to stand. So basically they create kind of like assassins, I guess. And each year 100 girls are like sold to the academy, but after 10 years of like training and trials, only 3 emerge. And one of these girls that has gone to the academy was Rue, but she actually sold herself. She was like not sold by someone, usually it's their parents. She actually sold herself. She sort of like chose to go. And we are following her like years later as she is, you know, much older, and she has like left that life behind and she has found peace, but war comes like knocking at her door again because there are like these people that are sent after her. And so we are following her like in the present when she's older and seeing her have to like figure out why these people are after her, like what the hell is happening and how it's connected to like her past in the academy and all that. And we also get like, especially in the beginning, like a few POVs in the academy, and like we see what these girls have to go through and also like what they have to do to be able to survive this place. And then there is like a third timeline, and it's like the most, especially at first, the most intriguing timeline, the most mysterious. And I loved it. I absolutely love this book. I love following Rue. Like I was very hooked. And definitely like the part I was most interested in was like the academy setting and also like the other mysterious timeline, because those were the ones where we got to, I guess, connect even more to the characters. I also really like to follow Rue in the present, but yeah, the others we definitely got to connect more to the characters. And there were a lot of action scenes, there were a lot of crazy things happening, and I was hooked the whole time. And when like everything came together and like everything was revealed, and especially like also the ending was crazy and we learned like what the hell is happening, like I absolutely loved it and I gave it 5 stars. It was actually my first 5-star of the year. I had 2 before, like in the first 3 months, but they were rereads, so like I'm not counting that. So like the first real, you know, new 5-star of the year was this one. And yeah, I had a great time. I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait for more books in the series to come out. Then I read Wolfworm, which was like fantasy horror, and we were following Sonia, and she was a scientific illustrator, and she used to like draw for her father because he was like a scientist, but after he died she had to find someone new to work for. And so she gets the opportunity to work for Dr. Halder to draw his like collection of insects. And when she gets to the house, at first everything seems like okay, but then she starts learning that her predecessor, who was actually Dr. Halder's wife, like she disappeared, and the wildlife around the house is acting strangely, and she learns about these parasitic bugs. And at the same time, there is like the talk of some creatures, like some blood thieves. And then she like stumbles onto something that she definitely should not have found, and she gets in a lot of trouble because of it, and she has to like try to survive. And I really liked it. I was definitely very creeped out, and there was some like body horror that was crazy, in like for me who loves body horror in the best way possible. Like it was so good. And yeah, there were some creepy scenes as well, and I really liked it. I was having such a great time. It was very disgusting at times, but I was having such a great time, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Ironheart, which was the second and last book in the Crier's War duology, which was fantasy. And in this one we had like humans and Autome living in the world, and the humans were actually basically servants of the Autome because there had been a war some years prior and the Autome won, so the humans were just servants to them. And the Autome were basically like, they're not born, they were like created initially by humans, and they're like created to be perfect in the image of like whoever creates them. And so there is a group of rebel humans that are planning to, you know, overtake the Autome. And specifically we follow Ayla, who is a human. She's part of that rebel group, and she obviously is like, she wants this revolution for all humans, but she also has like a personal vendetta against the sovereign of the Otome of like that area, because her parents died because of him. So she wants to kill his daughter Crier, and Crier is an Otome. She was created to be perfect in the sovereign's image, and Ayla wants to kill her. And so Ayla actually starts working as like sort of a maid to Crier, and she gets to know her, and she realizes that like maybe Crier isn't so bad. And Crier, like, she doesn't know a lot about anything like the world, the Otome, herself, or like humans. And a lot of what we learn in the first book is like as she's learning as well. And I really liked it. The first book. I really liked the first book. I really liked the plot. I also really like the characters, and even the romance, I thought it was like okay. I usually don't care about the romance. This one I actually like, I sort of enjoyed. And going into the second book, like, things at the end of the first one were kind of crazy. So in the second book, they had to deal with the aftermath of all that, and definitely they were in trouble. Both of the main characters were in trouble, and there is like a new enemy emerging, and definitely a new enemy of the humans, but also a new enemy of some of the Otome. And so they have like this sort of common enemy, but at the same time, humans and Otome are still mostly enemies of each other. And so there is this interesting dynamic there. And in this one, I definitely was more like even more interested in the plot. I really liked it, but the romance I just really didn't care about anymore. So yeah, I felt overall the same way as I did with the first book. And so I gave the first book 4 stars, and I also gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Homebound, which was sci-fi, and this one we're following a bunch of different POVs in like different years. And it all starts in 1983. We're following Bex, and she's like creating a video game. She's finishing a video game after her uncle died, and like he wanted both of them to work on it together. And after he had died, she's like really grieving because they used to be really close, and she is gonna like finish the game that, you know, he dreamed of for both of them. And that video game seems to be like the connection for everything that happens in the other timelines, like in the future. And so in 2078 we have like a scientist, and we are following that scientist, seeing what they are creating. And we also follow like a sentient robot throughout like some of the years. And there is like talk of an astronaut that went somewhere and is exploring and might be in trouble or might be coming back, and there are like people looking for her. And then in 2586 we are following the captain of a ship, and Earth seems to be almost entirely covered by water in that time, and that captain is trying to save like a crewmate, and they get approached by someone who wants to go somewhere and they need to travel, and so they want her to take them on her ship. And that also is like connected to that astronaut. And like I said, everything seems to be connected to the video game that Bex created in the 1980s. And at first I was very confused about how everything was connected, but once I start seeing the connections, I was very intrigued. I mean, I was intrigued from the beginning because I wanted to know what was happening. I was confused, but like in a good way. I was intrigued, I wanted to know, but once it all started to connect, I really, really liked how it's connected, and I really liked the story, and I really liked the characters. I connected to like most of the characters, and I really cared about their stories and about what they were going through and about what they were trying to get to. And yeah, overall I had a really good time. I think just like Yesteryear, I think this was a debut. So for both of these books, I will definitely be interested in checking out future works by these authors because I really like both of them. I also gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Prey, which was sci-fi and sort of like thriller. And so in that one, we start following Jack, and he, like his youngest child, who is still a baby, she like one day or one night, she gets like rashes all over her body, and then she gets like bruises all over her body, and like the doctors don't seem to know what the hell is happening. And at the same time, Jack's wife is acting very strangely, and then he finds some things in their house that like no one seems to know where they came from. And we also learn about these nanoparticles that were created by something, but they seem to have changed their behavior. They're not working as they were intended, and they are working as predators, and we humans are the prey. And so Jack is actually called to help with that. and we see them like learn about what is happening with these nanoparticles and how they're behaving and how they might be able to stop them. And I definitely really like the beginning, like all of this setup, and I did really like the ending. But the whole middle section, I was kind of bored because like at the ending there was a lot of action, but yeah, in the middle like it was okay, but I was a little bored and it was like a little slow for me. So there were times that I was really enjoying it and was really having a good time, and there were others where it was just okay. And at the end, I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read The Songbird and the Heart of Stone and The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk, which were books 3 and 4 in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, and the 2 books in the Shadowborn duet, I think, which is fantasy romance, romantasy, either of those. And so in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, when it starts, like the first books in that series, the first duology, I guess, of that series, we follow Oraya, and she is human, but she is the daughter of a vampire king, and she enters a competition because whoever wins that competition can ask a wish from their goddess, so like Nyaxia, and she wants to get something. And so we see her compete through that, and then she meets Rain, and he is a vampire, and he's like the love interest, and the first 2 books are about them. And Misha, who is the main character in these 2 books, is Rain's best friend. And I really, really liked Misha, and so I was reading these books honestly for her because I did like the first book in the series, but I did not like the second. But then I learned that these 2 were going to be about Misha, and I really liked Misha, so I decided to read these 2. And so Misha, at the end of like the first duology, she does something. And so in this 3rd book, or like the first of her own duology, she's dealing with the aftermath of what she did, and she's definitely in trouble. But she's actually saved by someone, and that someone wants her help to resurrect a god. And so they go on this quest, and we also see that like Misha used to be a human, and then she became a vampire because you can either be born a vampire or you can be turned into a vampire in this world. And she was actually turned into a vampire. But when she was human, she used to worship another god. And that god is still like asking her for favors and still wants her to do something, which kind of goes against the other plan that she's working on. And so she's having to deal with all of this. And honestly, like Misha was a reason why I was reading these books. And we also have flashbacks about her life as a human, and they were really like terrible. Her life was horrible, but learning about her was like the part that I was the most interested in. Like the fantasy part was okay, like the other element, like what they were working on, like it was okay, but I was really here for Misha and I did not care about the romance. But overall, like I had a good time and I gave it 3.5 stars. But then the last book, I just did not care about anything. I still liked Misha, but we were also getting like the other characters' POV, so it wasn't just about Misha, and the flashbacks were about the other character and not her, and I just didn't really care. And again, I didn't care about the romance. And in this one, even the fantasy plot, like I did not care at all. I couldn't have cared less, and I was just really, really bored. And this was a very long book, and it felt like a very long book, and I was just bored. So yeah, sadly, I did not have a good time, and I think I am really leaving this series here. I'm not going to be reading future books. And yeah, I gave this one 2 stars. And I think, in addition to the fact that the World Cup is on and I'm not reading much because of that, I think this last book was the reason why I got in a reading slump, because like I read the first in that series, then I read the 2 books I'm going to be telling you about, and then I read The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk. And I think, or like I finished it after. So I think that is the reason why, or part of the reason why I got in a reading slump, because I was not having a good time with that book. But having said that, the last 2 books that I'm going to be telling you about are A Little Hatred and The Trouble with Peace, which are books 8 and 9, I want to say, in the First Law world. And this is fantasy, and there was like a first trilogy, then there were 3 standalones, 1 short story collection, and now there is a final trilogy, and these are the first 2 books in that final trilogy. And so A Little Hatred is book 8, and it's the first in the, like I said, the last trilogy, which is called Age of Madness, I think. I want to say. I'm terrible with series names, in case you haven't realized. Yeah, The Age of Madness. And this is set, I think, 20 years after the end of the first trilogy. So, like, the world definitely has changed, and, like, this is like the industrial age has started in this world. So there are a lot of things that have changed, and that is definitely part of some of the issues that they're having. But at the same time, a lot of things remain the same, and like the Union, which is one of the places where the story sets, is still like at war with their neighbors in the north, in the west, in the south, and it's all for like sort of the same reasons as they have been since before, like since the first trilogy, and like the story like even before we started following it. And so yeah, a lot of things are different, but a lot of things are the same, and we are following actually a lot of the like these characters, like the children of the characters that we followed in the first trilogy, which is definitely a very interesting dynamic because we still see some of the other characters, but they're not like our main characters anymore. And yeah, there is still like a lot of conflict, there is a lot of action, and there is a lot of magic, especially through like one character. We see a lot of magic in these two books. And I love this world. I love the characters. And when I say I love the characters, like there are some that I like truly, truly hate, but I love them as characters. They're like such good characters. And most of them I love and hate. And I have very complex feelings about them. And they're all very complex characters as well. And yeah, they're just such great characters. And like I said, I love the world. I love the plots. I love the action scenes. And there are some that are like so gory and like so violent, so brutal. But at the same time, like the humor is definitely my kind of humor. So I also love this combination of like gory, brutal, violent scenes with the humor. And yeah, love the characters, love absolutely everything. And the pacing of these books is also like perfect for me because I am never ever bored for a single second, but also it's not too rushed, it's not too fast. And yeah, I love everything about them. If you cannot tell, I am obsessed with these books. And I gave both of them 5 stars. And yeah, I think the only reason why I didn't get in a reading slump earlier because I was reading The Fallen and The Kiss of Dusk and this one at the same time. But since I was way more invested in this one, I finished this one first. And, you know, I'm still vibing, having a good time reading. But then I finished that one, which I gave 2 stars. And I think that is, like I said, part of the reason why I'm in a reading slump. And also the World Cup is happening and I just want to be watching football games. So there's that. But yeah, finishing on, you know, a high note, I gave these 2 books 5 stars. And it took like 4 months for me to get a 5-star book. But then in the last 2 months, I got 3 5 stars. So, you know, cannot complain. And yeah, these are all the books that I read in the last 3 months. And that is the end of this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you did, give it a like and subscribe. And I will talk to you next time. Bye!